I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You are the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. You know, one of the great things about doing this online bit is every once in a while I just get to have some fun. And I get to decide who comes on the program. And one of my favorites is a gentleman that he's been on before. And he's a retired detective, a cold case detective out in the Los Angeles area. And he is also someone who teaches apologetics. And so he takes a lot of the principles that he has used over a career in law enforcement in solving crimes, especially cold case crimes, and applies them to looking at things in Scripture, some of the controversial things, some of the objections that people who do not accept Christianity might have. It's a fascinating take. And he's always doing some interesting things. And so he joins me today. His name is J. Warner Wallace. And I want to show you real quickly kind of a new thing. This is where it gets kind of fun, frankly. His son, Jimmy Wallace, is also a police officer in the Los Angeles area, currently working in the police force. But together they have, they're coming out with a thing that's interesting. It's called a graphic novel. I know this is what it looks like. A lot of you, you're going to be like, "Oh, it's a comic book." It's more than a comic book. It's I think he would say it's more for adults as well. But it's based on case files, and so we'll tell you a little bit more about that and how that came about. But we're going to look at some things. We're going to have some fun today. So I appreciate you guys being here. What do I call you? Jay Warner, Detective Wallace? What?
You could just call me Jim. I feel like sometimes these titles we get are ridiculous, right? I mean, somehow in the last 10 years, I've been called a Christian apologist. And I think what I really am, honestly, is I'm just a Christian who became a Christian this weird way. And I'm happy to talk about that. And yes, there is evidence for this. So I think that really, yeah, I guess I am a Christian apologist, but I've never really thought of myself that way. I've thought of myself as a guy who became a Christian using the evidence. You know, by way of the evidence, I became a Christian. So there you go. What do you call that? That's who I am.
It works for me. I call it very interesting. So we'll go with that. All right, Jim. So before we get into some of the things about the graphic novel, I cannot call it a comic book. Sorry, the graphic novel.
Well, you're right. Look, you're absolutely right in the sense that that's how I'm somebody who was raised with. I was never big. I of course saw comic books. All of us growing up saw comic books. But my son Jimmy was one of these guys who was like a comic book geek. I mean, this guy, he collects comic books. He's got thousands of comic books, and behind him in his house, he's got all these boxes of comic books. And if you're a reader of comic books, you become a pretty good writer of comic books. So when we started to think about how we could do fiction moving forward, we thought, well, this is like 5 comic book lengths. So this is a book really of 160 pages that is entirely illustrated. It's just, so it really looks like either a storyboarded movie or like a large heavy duty comic book. That's kind of what it looks like. And so, yeah, it's been so much fun though, because I think there is a generation of people maybe who won't, if I wrote a strict book on the evidence for Christianity, they would probably go, maybe I'm not interested in that yet. But if you are interested in what a Christian worldview has to say about some really kind of difficult situations in life, because that's what murder investigations are, this is the kind of book that could at least provoke your interest. And we try not to make it too overtly, preachy or Christian apologetics,
Yeah, no, I love it. And you know what? You're actually, the term you use is exactly right. I actually studied film in school, ended up going in the television direction, but the storyboard is exactly what these things look like, which is, to me, is a lot cooler, but a lot more appealing. Here's a question I wanted to ask you before we run into some of that trail is, explain a little bit about sort of your whole family, because, I mean, you guys not only have the same name, you guys all have the same occupation. What's up with the Wallaces and the police officers?
Well, I guess the Jim Wallace name over and over again is just arrogance. Yeah,
or tradition.
The first boy.
Tradition.
Yeah, the first boy, you say he's going to be named after me. Well, that was my situation with my dad. He's got 3 other boys, but I'm the first, and so I got his name, and I followed in his footsteps in the same agency. We've been at the same agency with the same name for 63 years.
Wow.
And it's funny because there are people who will call, and like my son will answer the phone, and they'll say. He'll answer, Detective Wallace. And people will go, Jim? And he'll say, yes. And they'll say, you're still working there? Are you still there? Like, I'm not even sure if they're looking for me or if they're looking for my dad. I mean, how long do you stay on the job, right? So this has been our kind of a blessing to us. And you look, here's what we've been able to look at. We've been able to see some things in law enforcement don't change. I mean, the nature of humans, how we interact, what drives us to do terrible things, what drives us to misbehave. Those are innate features of the human being that don't change over time. So you're going to experience those if you're working as a cop in 1964, or like my dad did, or 1960, or 1988, like I did, or 2025, like my son is. You're going to experience those conditions of human nature over and over and over again. But what does change is the culture and how the culture perceives cops to begin with. You know what's interesting? I realized this as I would introduce myself as a detective. I'm generally well received by audiences who don't always know that a detective is actually a police officer. Like they think we're in a different category. Like, those uniform people, though, we hate them. Right. But you guys who solve crimes that's a different, well, we are just police officers who eventually moved up to this position. Usually when we got too old to do the job, when we got too old to chase bad guys in uniform, we usually end up in suits, investigating. So we are the same. And so Jimmy's had a chance to see what the world looks like in a very turbulent decade in which law enforcement has been perceived by culture. So I don't envy him. I actually am glad I did the job when I did it.
Yeah, I think, cops are the ones that pull me over and give me a speeding ticket, but detectives are the ones that solve the crime when something bad happens to me. So I think
that's a really good point. And I tell you, we see the same thing, and I'll just throw this out because I think it's something that we kind of talk about a little bit, is we see the same thing when you look at the nature of God. God's nature, if you look in the Old Testament and in the New, is he's always described as the fullness of either truth and grace or the fullness of justice and mercy. That balance, I talk about this in one chapter of Truth and True Crime. This balance between truth and, now here's what happens. First responders always reflect the culture. And if you think about it, we're like the first face of whatever society you're living in. And those typically are firemen and policemen. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that firemen and policemen are perceived as the two extremes of the nature of God. Fire is typically the mercy and grace side, right? And you call a fireman because most of it's paramedic work, and you're calling them to be saved. Mm-hmm. And but the cops are always representing the truth and justice side of God's nature. And I don't think anyone much likes that side of God's. We all want the mercy and grace, but please don't confront us with truth and justice. So I think the way that, like in this turbulent season we've just been through in the last, let's say, 6 years, I don't think firemen have experienced much change in all in terms of public perception. Mm-mm. But we sure have seen a shift in public perception when it comes to law enforcement. And that's largely because we're stuck on that one side, the side that is almost always, if a cop's coming to your house, it's never for anything good. But if a fireman's coming, it's usually to save you, to rescue you, to bring you, to make sure you're okay. Yeah. So it's two very different approaches, but I do think together, those two sets of first responders do give people the best sense of the robust nature of God.
That's a fascinating observation. That's why I love having you on the program. I've never thought of it in those terms, especially out in California, where you've had the wildfires. I mean, the firemen, they're the heroes, and then all the issues with the police officers. But I will say that I don't fear a police officer unless I'm doing something wrong, like speeding, which would be pretty much the extent of it. Otherwise, I'm great. But man, if you are living outside the bounds, right? Yeah, you got a lot to fear with a police officer.
You just did your own translation of Romans 13.
Yeah.
The first part of Romans 13, where Paul says, hey, if you've got nothing to fear, you don't need to fear the sword of these peacekeepers who are ordained by God. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, this is the only group outside of ministers in which that Greek word that's used for minister. So every other place in the New Testament where you see that word being used, it's to describe a servant of God who's leading a group, a minister of God's word. But then you see it in Romans 13 applied to those who have to bear the sword to basically enforce the laws. Same word is used, though. So we are seen really as servants of a holy God in the same way that ministers are seen as. But here's the problem, is that not all cops are Christians. As a matter of fact, I suspect that the number of cops that are Christians is much lower than the general population. So that being the case, we have to do it as Christians who are police officers. And this is why, by the way, we wanted to do a book like Case Files. We kind of thought, hey, if Christianity is true, it has to exist and make sense in a very gritty, dirty, messy environment that is called the world. If you're a cop and you're seeing all this stuff, you might just dismiss Christianity altogether, because how in the world could there be a loving, all-powerful God if this mess is going on?
Right.
So we have to be able to write a story that is not just, the Pollyannish version of the world that Christians can kind of dance through. That is instead a very messy version of the world that Christianity still speaks into. And that's what we're looking for in a book like this.
Yeah. All right. So the other question, again, personal, about the family. You're an adjunct professor of apologetics at Biola University. Your son's got a master's degree in apologetics. What is up with the police and apologetic thing in your family too? I wouldn't expect that combination necessarily.
Well, and I have two sons who are very interested in the Christian worldview from just different evidential perspectives. My other son's a doctor, and he loves the kind of the evidence in biology that points to the divine creator. So we all have these interests. Part of it was that I didn't know any other. Look, I was raised without Christians in my life. My dad's not a believer. I just didn't go to church growing up. I didn't really step foot in an evangelical church for any reason other than like a wedding, really until I walked in the first church at 35. And heard the pastor talk about Jesus as a smart guy. That smart version of Jesus provoked me to buy a Bible. That's what started all of this. But to get in, I needed to know, are these claims about this Jesus of Nazareth in the first century, are they historically true? Yeah. Did they actually happen? What's the data for this, the evidence that this actually occurred the way you're claiming it occurred? And that's really a lot of what you do in any investigation of a crime in the past. I don't care if that crime is 2 hours ago or if that crime is 2 decades ago. You need to know, is that record you have for me reliable? How do I test it? So that's how I came in. My kids were about, 8 and 6 when I got saved. So Jimmy remembers, what that was like for me. And then what conversations we had at the dinner table after that were just obsessive evidence for Christianity conversations. And so because he was raised in it, it became like, this is what he thinks of. This is what he thinks Christianity is. Okay. There is no other version for him. And so here we are now all these years later. And it's not like every detective is going to apply that. My dad has all of the same skills that I have and that Jimmy has, yet he is not a Christian. I've written books where I've written about him, talked to him. I wrote one book to him, put his picture in the introduction of the book. He's never read that book. He says he started it. That's about as far as I can get him to go. And so what it means is there's got to be something in addition to your investigative ability that drives this. Of course, it's God's Spirit, right? It's that until God first makes you bend your knee to something that's true, you will never embrace it. And so that's like with my dad. I'm not praying that he studies the evidence, because he could study the evidence all he wants and still reject it. I'm praying that he will bend his knee, because it turns out without that kind of evidential humility, if you don't have humility, and I don't mean humility like I'm prideful, but I mean just the humility to be teachable, well, then no one's going to be able to teach you anything, including, so this is why the first move is, and then I think that is the thing that God's Spirit does, is that if you give a book to somebody who gives them an apologetics book, why would he want to read it? That's where God calls. He softens our spirit to be receptive to something that we weren't previously receptive to. And I don't even deny that in my own life. I'm sure that had to happen before I would walk in that church and not just blow it off. I walked in that church and suddenly I was interested. Well, why? Because God was doing something first. But again, in the end, what convinced me was the evidence, which, by the way, God has been doing since the Gospels. You see this all the time. John the Baptist, right? He sends his disciples to Jesus. He wants to know, John sent us. He wants to know, are you the one? Can you imagine what Jesus must have been thinking? My cousin John sent you? The one who leapt in the womb, the one who baptized me and saw God descend. Really? You tell that knucklehead that he needs to have more faith. No, that's not what he does. He does 3 miracles in front of John's disciples, and he says, go back and tell John what you just saw. He's going to convince him with the evidence of the miracles. Yeah. So in the end, I just needed to be convinced that way too.
Yeah, I love the much maligned doubting Thomas because he just said, I want to see it for myself. You guys got to see it. I want to see it for myself. And what did Jesus do? He's like, yeah, here you go.
Here you go.
Come touch.
Here you go.
He's not offended by that.
And then he says, hey, by the way, blessed are those who don't need to see this and still yet believe. But you know why they're going to believe, Thomas? Because you and all these other folks are my eyewitnesses who are going to tell them. They would not know otherwise if you guys don't tell them. That is called direct evidence in a criminal trial. It's the eyewitness testimony of the disciples. So we cannot just say, okay, well, Jesus said that blessed are those who don't need to see this. Well, yeah, but they're going to get the word through another form of evidence called direct evidence. So you just need to remember that Jesus, at his very root, is an evidentialist. He says, if you don't believe what I'm telling you, you could believe the witnesses of the Father, of John the Baptist, or you could simply believe the evidence of the miracles I've worked in front of you. So there's both direct and indirect evidence that he's using. That's what we use for every criminal trial. When I saw him doing that, I thought, wow, I like this dude. This guy's speaking my language, you know? So a lot of it is that's kind of what Jimmy saw growing up. And that's really the only version he could embrace.
Which brings us to, now you know, if you're watching, listening, the sort of the background for this graphic novel. So again, this is the graphic novel, Case Files, Murder and Meaning, which the way it's structured implies that you guys are planning more of these, I'm assuming. So
yeah, and I'm surprised that the publisher put it that way.
Oh,
I was thinking that puts a lot of pressure, right? Like, what if this thing is just terrible and everyone hates it, and like, please don't write another one? And then you're kind of like stuck, like with volume 2. But what we're trying to do here is to kind of measure out some careful thinking about the nature of what the Christian worldview claims, and then put that in a police drama that just it's not, you're not going to get the full gospel in every one of these books. As a matter of fact, you'll see that the major character in all of our books, really all the major characters in this book, are not Christians. Now, we have a message. We want these non-Christians to experience something that causes them to think deeply about the worldviews they hold. And in this first book, here's what we're doing. We're kind of locking down what makes humans valuable in the first place. Because if you've watched the news, you know that today in every major city, there's going to be a murder, several. And you're going to have to figure out, by the way, you're not even going to hear about them. If you're living in that city, you may not hear about them. Yet if one of us gets killed, somebody special, quote unquote, it's going to be national news. Well, hold on. Do you think that the other ones that got murdered today are not as valuable? Why aren't we talking about them? Because we have a sense in culture that some people, sadly, are more interesting or important than others. But this is not how God sees us. So what we tried to do in this book is talk about what is human value, how do we measure it, what is it grounded in, why is one murder more important to investigate than another, and we want to challenge that. We want the reader to come away going, yeah, the Christian worldview actually does make the most sense of even criminal investigations because it grounds human value in a way that no other worldview can ground it. And if that gets you thinking about the Christian worldview, then what we have is a link in the back of the book that'll take you to our kind of case for material. But we also know that a lot of people are going to read this and not even think it's a Christian graphic novel until probably the very, very, last couple of lines. And even then it's not going to preach at you too hard because we want to reach people who are not quite ready to hear the gospel yet, but we hope that these kinds of materials will start to open the door to their thinking. And I think also if you're looking for something to give somebody, that's our hope, is that you'll give it to somebody who you can't reach any other way. This is something you can try.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, for a lot of you, if you're watching and you watch Life Today Live, you're Christians and you probably have those loved ones, maybe a son, grandson, just a friend, a coworker, that you're like, how do I get through to them? I love the uniqueness of this and the approach of this. It's kind of like Paul when he goes to Rome. He's talking about all their gods. You even have this unknown God, and so he's kind of spinning this story that they're familiar with. And at the very end, he goes, "Well, let me tell you who that is."
Yeah.
And so I love the approach.
You know how that is, right? When he's in Athens and he says to everybody, hey, you guys have a thought about God. You guys think deeply about God, but your thoughts about God are kind of sideways. It's kind of like us saying, hey, you got thoughts about the world. You think you understand how the world operates and why even detective mysteries are fun to watch. But it turns out that there's a better explanation for why you ought to work a murder series. And it's not just because your career is going to be enhanced by it, you can achieve something. Or maybe that one victim is important enough to work. Every victim is important enough to work because we ground value in a different way. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to explore. And we're trying to also explore, and I think Jimmy's done a great job of this, because the most I do, honestly, is I chart the overarching direction of the story with Jimmy. We work back and forth in charting that. But when it comes time to write them scene by scene and panel by panel and conversation by conversation, it's all Jimmy. And what I love about it is, number one, he's captured, I think, if you read it, you'll see that he's captured how cops really talk. And it's very different than you see on TV. There's a certain level of general sarcasm but which comes from just having to see the worst things that can possibly be seen on a daily basis. Sure. That just becomes part of the vernacular. It's not like it's reserved for one character in a series. Oh, he's the crusty guy. You see that a lot, right, in these detective series. It's that there's a general ethos that comes with this job. And I think he's done a great job of, even with some humor, of capturing these conversations between characters. So what we're trying to do is a little bit of both. Like, we're trying to develop characters so that you'll actually resonate with the characters you're reading about. And we're just not trying to race to a conclusion here. We're trying to give you a journey through the lives of detectives and what they experience. Even the lead character's got relationships with his daughter that are, up and down. And so we want to explore all the things that we see every day in the lives of detectives.
I love it. Okay, I'm going to show people a couple things real quick. You can actually go to, there's a URL that'll take you to the Cold Case Christianity website. It is casefilesgraphicnovel.com. That'll take you straight to the graphic novel, but it's all part of the same website. It looks like this, by the way, and it says right there, case file or pre-sale. Sorry, that's the word I wanted to say. Pre-sale, but it's actually out now, so. That'll flip real soon.
That'll flip, yep.
Yeah. Yep. So what I wanted to point out, though, is that you also have a lot of great videos and some writings on the website, and I was looking through those. Again, I love the approach that you take, both from an evidentiary standpoint and just your eye as a detective. It's different than what we get from the pulpit, which is just a good, interesting, another way of looking at it, right? Triangulating here. But tell me what you're doing with the videos, because I'd love for people to hit the website and kind of go through some of those videos.
Yeah, what we try to do is we try to produce content. I always say that, look, when you have an author who's offering something, I have no problem with people who want to exhaust every single thing this guy or gal is offering for free before they spend any of their money. I totally get it. I think we have to earn a right to be able to sell a book to somebody. And I don't like the idea that we're selling. But I've got a pension. I'm a retired detective. That's my life. I've got grandkids. But at the same time, how do you deep dive the deepest ideas you have? Like, there's no way I can piece that out in a video. When I teach cold case Christianity at Biola, that takes me 18 hours. No one's going to watch your 18-hour video. So what you do is you write books to kind of be the basis for any 4-minute video that you're going to use that's going to make a small piece of the case. So what we try to do, though, is to provide, we have over, I think, 1,700 videos at YouTube, which are linked at our website, that we just want to kind of piece out that case so you can see what it looks like from a detective's perspective. We also, by the way, have a website for police officers called thethinbluelife.com.
Oh, wow.
And that's really police work from a Christian perspective. So we want to come at it both ways, right? Christianity from a police perspective and police work from a Christian perspective. But the point is, the videos and the resources are there for free, because we think actually that we're in an age where pretty much everyone is like, I always wonder, like, what is the future? If this was a movie, nobody would probably buy the graphic novel, because this entire visual sequence of storytelling could be available in a video format. Mm-hmm. Graphic novels are really kind of where books meet video, where books meet movies. And so we're trying to get this out in a way that we can't really, no video we could make would ever tell the story we can tell as effectively in case files. But yeah, you're right. What we're thinking is, for a culture that is entirely listening to podcasts now and watching YouTube, and this is a huge platform, and we just want to make sure we contribute our share of it, and that's what we try to do. And again, we're not a ministry, we're not a 501c3, we're just a couple of guys who work as detectives who feel like, hey, God's called us to say something about him. I take that Great Commission really seriously, but when you hear it from me, it's going to sound more like apologetics, because that's the way I came in. But in the end, it turns out my case for Christianity has no power. The power is entirely in the gospel. That's it. But for me as an atheist, I couldn't hear the gospel. It was the Charlie Brown teacher. Wah, 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 wah. I couldn't hear it. I needed first to have my prideful objections addressed. That's it. And so for me, that journey through the evidence is what knocked down the prideful objections. So then when the gospel was fully preached, I actually heard it as English rather than as the saxophone sound. So it's just really important for me to be able to cover that with people. And most of the time, my preaching of the gospel sounds like a case for the gospel. At least that's going to be part of it, because that's what I needed to hear so I could hear those words correctly.
Yeah, I love it. All right, I love the title even of the first Case Files graphic novel, Murder, which we all get, which is in all, like big caps, gets everybody's attention, and meaning, because that's the ultimate, is the meaning. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. It's what is behind the words we use matters. Your worldview matters. We tell high schoolers this all the time. Of all the trajectory decisions you could make that'll set the course for your life, the first and most important one is worldview. What view of the world is correct? If Christianity is true, you need to get all in. If it's false, you need to abandon it. You need to figure out what version of the world, what worldview version is actually accurate, because every other decision you make, it'll be grounded in that first decision.
So true. So true. I love it. All right. Jay Warner, Jim, and a long line of Jimmy Wallace's. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. You've been such a great friend to me on this journey, so I appreciate you.
Oh, I love it. I'm hoping we can do more together in the future, but we'll see where God takes us. All right. Right now, you just need to be taken to the website, coldcasechristianity.com. Check out Case Files. Pick it up now. Order it for someone you love or yourself, or pass it along, whatever you want to do. And come back. We've got more for you next time here on Life Today Live.